Hey, turn with me in your Bibles to the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John. If you get to your New Testament, it's the fourth book over there, Gospel of John, and we're going to look at chapter 1. We're here in our in the fourth part of our series, Re-Advent. Re as in like about, Advent. And each Sunday has started with a something, right? The first Sunday we looked at that Jesus will return. The next week we talked about that he came to reconcile, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, it's all been re-words. I tried to be really clever with the title here. I'm usually not very clever with my titles, but here you go. Today what we're going to talk about is that he came to reveal. This is what Jesus came to do. It's what he still comes to do. And I think I've stalled long enough. You should have it. The Gospel of John, chapter 1. Say amen if you got it. If you don't, it's up on the screen for you. I'm going to read from the New International Version. We're going to look at verses 1 through 14. This is how it reads. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world didn't recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, not of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Just for emphasis here in verse 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. We'll look at how Jesus reveals God for us and reveals God's plan to us as we talk about what Jesus comes to reveal today. Would you pray with me as we begin? Our Father, by your spoken word, the worlds were formed. So now as your word is preached, would you form our worlds to align with your kingdom, form our character to look like that of your Son. Take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think with them. Take our hearts, set them on fire with love for you. It's in Christ's name we ask it. Amen. Well, the next time I see y'all is going to be Christmas Eve itself. So this is our last Sunday before Christmas. Christmas Eve, we're going to have a great time. It's going to be mostly a lot of music and the story in Scripture. I may share a short devotion, but it'll be a good time that night. But this is really my last time to preach to you about Christmas and what that all means. Christmas is by far the most popular holiday in America. It's the most widely celebrated. 90% of Americans celebrate Christmas. And this has been a stable number for a lot of years. It stays right there. But only 55% of Americans celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday. And that number has been declining for at least the last 10 years. The implication here is that many people enjoy Christmas as long as they can decide what it means. As long as they can decide what it means for themselves. And there's lots of meanings to choose from out there. There's plenty of meanings on the smorgasbord of Christmas. There seem to be at least a half a dozen Hallmark movies that come out every Christmas time, and now Netflix and Amazon has gotten in on the action too, that they use the same formula every time. Let's see if you recognize it. There's a guy or a girl, and they seemingly have it all, and they're from the big city, but somehow they end up in a small town, and then they meet somebody, and usually there's like a kid or a dog somewhere in there, and there's some challenges, but it's nothing that's too unpredictable. It's all manageable. They get it sorted out. It snows. They kiss. The end. That's the movie, right? That's how it works. See, what they're telling you is that romance is the thing. Romance is where you find meaning, that this special time of year is your opportunity to find that special someone or to rekindle the flame with that special someone in your life. And, it's a lot of pressure. I mean, first of all, if you don't have somebody, you have to find somebody, and then they have to live up to all your ideals. It seems like a lot of stress. Well, the most popular meaning of all for the season has to be family and children, the bonding, the togetherness. Everyone gets together and everyone forgives and starts getting along. This is the time of year for that uncle to finally start acting right. Or maybe you're that uncle, I don't know. But you can thank Charles Dickens for this one. That's very popular. Another one that kind of goes with it is experience. Experience is where we find meaning. That we find meaning for the season through travel or going to some event or maybe carrying on some special tradition. These are sources of meanings. These are sources that we look to for meaning during the season. They're sources that we look to for meaning in our lives, and those seem to be the most well-worn. I'm sure there's more. And there's nothing really wrong with any of that, but look, it's probably not going to happen, okay? Or at least it's not all going to happen on Christmas Eve with snow. Or it's not really going to last, or in the end, it just doesn't run deep enough. It just doesn't run deep enough. See, you need something that's more solid and more lasting and more significant to build a life on. You need something deeper. And here's the Gospel of John. Right here, we have 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke have a lot in common. They're called synoptics. They see things kind of the same. But John just goes off completely in his own direction. You read the other 3 Gospels, you recognize a lot of the features. You read the Gospel of John, it's like you've landed on a different planet. John doesn't have a baby. He doesn't have a manger. He doesn't have shepherds. He doesn't have wise men. He doesn't have angels, except that he kind of does. He kind of does. See, John is the same one who gives us Revelation, the book of Revelation, and many people mistakenly read that book with an eye towards trying to figure out some puzzle. Like, well, who is this character, and what does this number mean, and what does this city represent, and what's it all, what's the real behind it? Well, see, that's moving in the opposite direction than what John is doing in Revelation. It's moving in the opposite direction than his original audience, those churches in Asia Minor, would have understood. See, that they had a different problem. They knew all the earthly figures. They knew the identities. That wasn't a problem. It wasn't a puzzle to them. They knew Domitian, the emperor. They knew Rome. They knew the absurd occasional persecution from the local provincial governors. They knew about the economy. They knew about the social stratification. They knew all that. What they didn't know was, what does it all mean? Is it all just random? Why does this all keep happening to us? And where is Jesus in all of this? See, and the book of Revelation is just that. It's revelation. It's revealing. It's saying, hey, here's what's really going on. Here's the spiritual reality behind all these things that you're experiencing. And here in the Gospel of John, we get the same approach to Christmas. So instead of the baby in the manger and all the things you can see, he begins his gospel with the spiritual reality of what's happening behind the scenes. Rather than giving us the story and the facts of Jesus' birth and childhood like Luke and Matthew do, John is telling us about the meaning of it. Revealing what's behind all these events, what's going on. And what's going on is this, that in the beginning was the Word, and that Word became flesh. That's the meaning of Christmas right there. And it's something that's deep and solid enough to give meaning to your life too. Start with this truth right here. Jesus is the eternal Word of God. Jesus is the eternal Word of God. Now, why is that so vital to know? How does that give meaning and purpose and direction to my life? Well, because your Word is how you reveal your interior life. Your Word is how you reveal your interior life. See, I can observe a person. I can watch them. I can look at how they're dressed. I can watch the places that they go and the things that they do. And I can draw some conclusions about them based upon my observations, but I don't really know them until they actually speak to me, until they open up and tell me about themselves. I might find out that I was wrong in my conclusions, or even if I was right in my conclusion, I might lack understanding. I thought they didn't like cream in their coffee because I never see them put cream in their coffee, but it turns out they're lactose intolerant. They wish they could have cream in their coffee. See, people can show you who they are in a number of ways, but you can't really know somebody apart from their words. Their words reveal what they're thinking, what's inside their mind. They reveal their intentions. Hebrews 1 verse 1 says, God has spoken at many times and in many ways in the past, but now God has spoken to us by his Son. God was speaking through the law and the prophets and the events of history, but this is something entirely different here. This is something entirely different. God had been speaking, but this is something new. See, the prophets brought a word from God. Jesus did not bring a word from God. He is the Word of God. Let me see if I can explain the difference. Some of y'all, I've told you this little story before about my friend, my mentor, Larry Gibson, who's of blessed memory now. And he was a fan back in the 1970s of Chris Christopherson. Some of y'all might remember him. And he had a member of his church who was kind enough to buy him tickets to go hear Chris Christopherson in concert, and even got him backstage passes so that he could meet Chris Christopherson. My friend was all excited. They arrived at the venue. They're ready for the concert to start. But when the time came, nothing happened. And they waited and waited. And after a while, a guy came out and said, I have a message from Chris Christopherson. And he read a note that explained that he had had a family emergency and that unfortunately he was going to have to cancel the concert that evening. And so my friend, he never got to experience Chris Christopherson. He never got to meet Chris Christopherson. He heard a message from Chris Christopherson, but he never actually experienced him. He never actually experienced him. See, the prophets brought messages from God. They were real messages from God. They were often misunderstood, misinterpreted, rejected, ignored. But see, in Jesus, God comes himself. He is that word embodied. See, God's ultimate way of speaking is not a proposition, but a person. God's ultimate way of speaking is not a proposition, it's a person. See, this gets us over the problem of playing on the field of rationalism. Rationalism, trying to prove that what you believe is reasonable. It's trying to come up with that airtight argument. You see these videos on YouTube and Facebook, and they'll be entitled something like Teenage Girl Destroys Atheist Argument. There was even a whole movie a few years ago, God's Not Dead, that played off of this idea that somehow if we just come up with a perfect argument, if we can just out-debate our opponents, then we're going to be vindicated on the basis of rationality and reason. Now, don't misunderstand. There's lots of really good, solid evidence for the existence of God and the truth of Christianity, but people aren't born of God, as this text says, because they were argued into it. That's not how it works. So you'll hear people sometimes say, well, if God is real, then why doesn't he just prove it once and for all? Well, because there's no such thing as absolute proof. There's no such thing as absolute proof, not even in science. This gets into an area of philosophy known as epistemology. Epistemology, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Epistemology is simply the study of how you know what you know. How do you know it? So how do you prove that your reasoning is good without resorting to the very reasoning that you're using? It's kind of circuitous. How can you be absolutely certain? You can't be absolutely certain. Instead, there are degrees of probability based on your observations and your experience and your study. There are degrees of probability, and you can have something that's a very high degree of probability. But certainty is not available. If certainty was something that was out there, then there wouldn't be a need for faith. The great need of humanity anyways is not certitude. In fact, people get into all kinds of problems and do all kinds of crazy things when they're too certain. So God does not respond to our need with more proof or more evidence or better explanations. No, instead, he comes himself. The great Frederick Buechner passed away last year. He preached a sermon once called The Message in the Stars. And he tells a story in that sermon that God decided to arrange a constellation of stars so that it would read, I am here, signed God. and everybody can see the message from wherever they are, and they can read it in their own language. Here it is, incontrovertible proof, a billboard for the existence of God. God exists. And he says for a while, everybody's looking at the message, everybody's looking up and marveling at this message in the stars, until one night, a little boy reads that message and says, well, so what? Okay, he exists. So what? And eventually, everybody just kind of goes back to doing whatever they were doing before. See, God had already given more than enough evidence for his existence. God had spoken it many times and in many ways, as Hebrews says, and yet people continued on. We just continued on the sad, sorry, sinful history of humanity with violence and war and cruelty and grasping at power and control. See, to address our real need, God sums up all the things he has said at many times and in many ways in a word. A word that goes beyond all the words. The word. Here in Greek, the word is logos, is the word that gets translated word. It's where we get our word logic from. Now, people who were schooled in Greek philosophy, when they read John's gospel, they would immediately recognize this word logos. They knew what this was. Greek philosophers had long postulated that there was a logos, a logic, a purpose and reason at the center of the universe. And what we have to do, the task of philosophy, is to figure out what it is, and then to show people how to live in alignment with that logos, to show people how you can live in alignment with the logic of the universe. But the logic for them was an impersonal force. It wasn't just going to show up. It wasn't just going to reveal itself out for you. You have to figure it out. What is it? What's the universe about? Why is there life? And what's the purpose of our ability to reason? What's the meaning behind it all? What's it for? What's the meaning of life? What is the logos? And people formulated a number of different answers to that question. And based on which answer you found most compelling, you would live according to that. And this is where philosophical schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism came from, because they were all selling their ideas. This is where you find meaning. This is what it all means. And this is how you can live your life in alignment with that logos. And these ideas are still being sold out there, especially at Christmas time. Telling you, this is what life is about. This is the design and intention behind all of it. This is how to experience meaning in your life. But in verse 14, there's a surprise. John takes this turn that no Stoic and no Epicurean would have expected. The Word became flesh. The logos, the logic of the universe, the reason behind it all, the source of meaning has entered into this single human life. God does not respond to our need with a perfect explanation, but with a perfect person. Not a perfect explanation, a perfect person. Here's somebody who actually lives out the full intention of God for human life. He's the only one who was ever fully human the way that God designed humans to be, from beginning to end, from start to finish. It wasn't a matter of him trying this or trying that. No, he lives out a perfect fellowship and communion with God. It's the logos. My vehicle has an instruction manual. I have never read it. Don't laugh at me. You've never read yours either. I just do what I do. I push buttons and I turn knobs until it does what I want. And if it doesn't do what I want, then I'm just going to have to live with it probably. Or I'm going to take it to somebody who knows what they're doing. What's there in the manual though? The logos. That's what's in the manual. This is the logic of how the vehicle works. It's what it's all designed and purposed to do from the people who made it. And I would probably get better use out of my vehicle if I ran it according to the logos. But now imagine that the designer, the engineer, shows up in person. The one who wrote the manual shows up for me. The one whose idea this whole thing was, and he gets in the vehicle with me, and he starts driving, and he shows me the things that it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to be. See, in response to our greatest need, God didn't send a manual. He didn't send a set of instructions. He didn't send some new rules. He didn't send some new information or an explanation. Instead, he came himself and embodied his own design for human life, for relationship with God, for relationship with others. And this is what it was always supposed to be. Here's the designer. Here's the maker of it all. Verse 3, through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. And now he's shown up with what he's made. See, what you need in your life right now is not more information. What you need the most is a clearer and bigger vision of Jesus Christ and what he's done for you. You know, most of us don't really need more knowledge of the Bible. We don't. I mean, we could have some, but most of us don't need more knowledge of the Bible. The fact is, if Christians would just live out of as much knowledge of the Bible as they already have, the world would be in a wholly different place. See, most of us don't need more knowledge. What we need is we need to learn to read the Bible and to read our lives in him and in light of what he's done for us. He's the one who makes sense of it all. He's the one who pulls it all together. He's the one who brings all the loose ends together. He's the Logos. And he's the Logos for your life too. So when you can't figure things out, when things are unexplainable, when situations arise that you don't understand and you don't get the point and you don't get the purpose behind this, and when disappointment and frustration come and break down the door of your life, what you need is not somebody sending you a set of instructions or more advice or more information. You need someone with you. You need the meaning and purpose behind it all to step into your world, into your life, into your situation, and bring it all together the way that only he can. He's the Logos. This is what John is saying. Here's the Logos. Here's the meaning of it all who's come to you. Here's meaning and purpose and beauty and order. And it's not something you have to figure out. It's not something that you have to work out as best you can. No, it's someone who has come to you. It's not an impersonal force. It's not a truth. It's not a proposition that's out there. It's personal. He has shown up. In the words of the old creed, he came down from heaven. Rita and I were talking the other evening about the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke's gospel. And we talked about how the priest and the Levite, they don't stop to help the man that's been robbed and left for dead there in the ditch. And the reason they don't stop is not because they're terrible, unfeeling people. No, it's because to go down into the ditch, to stop and go down into the ditch and help that wounded man was to make yourself vulnerable to an attack. It could just be a ruse to claim another victim. Back in 1964, the murder of Kitty Genovese outside her apartment in New York City made national news, and it became the stuff of legend, and there's a lot of things that are debated about it. The details are kind of sketchy, but this much we know about it is that as she was being attacked, she screamed out for help, saying, "He's stabbing me. He's killing me." And lights came on in the surrounding apartments, but nobody came down. Nobody came down. Why not? Because if you come down there, you might get stabbed too. See, the Good Samaritan is actually a story that Jesus is telling, not to tell us to be kind and considerate and thoughtful to one another. No, it's a story that Jesus tells about himself. When the Lord of heaven heard the cry of broken, sinful humanity, he came down. Not at the risk of his life, but knowing that it would cost him his life. See, Christmas is not about God giving humanity some new information, some new rules. It's about God giving himself, God revealed, coming to you in his word. It's the personal revelation of God for you. See, to say that Jesus is the word is saying that this is God letting you in. The same way that we let people in by sharing our interior life with others through our words. And saying that Jesus is the Logos is saying that this word is God revealing his purpose in all of this. The purpose all along from the beginning. Literally, the secret of the universe is no longer a secret. Here it is in person. That's what Christmas is about. It's not about a birthday. It's about a birth. It's not about a birthday. What we celebrate is the incarnation. Literally, the word means taking on flesh. The fact that our God became a human being. The Word became flesh. Why? Well, Hebrews chapter 2 talks to us about it. There in verse 14 and 15, it says, "Since the children," that's us, "have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free all those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death." Why does God become human? The simple answer is for you. For you, because you're human. Because you're human. This is how you can understand what God has been saying all along. Emily Dickinson wrote a wonderful poem many years ago, said, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Tell it slant, or else the truth will dazzle us blind. In other words, we want the whole truth, but we need it. We need it in a way that we can understand it, in a way that we can accept it, in a way that we can receive it. We can't take it in all at once. Here's God coming to you, translated into human flesh. This is how you can experience and encounter God right where you are. The gospel can be summed up in 4 simple words. Jesus in my place. Jesus in my place. That's the gospel right there. Now, most of us understand this as his substitutionary death on the cross. Yes, but don't stop there. It takes a lifetime to really unpack that simple idea, Jesus in my place. Or as Hebrews puts it, he too shared in their humanity. That he came into our place, our humanity, our experience, even the worst of it. Everything that can be visited upon us, well, he's been right there. He's literally been there. Or are you grieving the loss of a loved one maybe this season? Well, he did too. You feel misunderstood or like nobody gets you? Listen, he got that all the time. You have a difficult or disconnected relationship with your family? Him too. People have rejected you, friends have abandoned you? Yeah, he's been there. Have you been falsely accused? Do you feel like you've been ignored or feel like you're a failure? He experienced all of that. Or are you tempted? Well, he was too. But see, for him, it wasn't just that he had a similar individual experience so that he could like empathize with you. Of course, he can empathize with you, but it's more than that. This is God stepping into your place. He's experiencing all of that as you, sharing in your humanity, so that when you come to those places in life, you can know he's right there with you. That he's right there with you, not just to make you feel a little bit better, but to free you from slavery and fear, working in you that he's broken the power of the devil. Isaiah, he said it this way. He said that this would be God with us. You can know his presence and his power with you. Not just an empathetic presence to make you feel better about things, but the one who knows all of it and endured it all for your sake is with you. His presence is there and he's working on your behalf. And you can know that. You can know that because of what he's done, because he's already been there. See, this is faith. This is faith. Faith is not, wow, I feel the presence and goodness of God with me in all of this mess and this situation and all of this waiting and all of this struggle. No, that's not faith. Faith is this. It's, I don't feel God's presence and goodness with me right now, but I know it's there. Amen. I know it's there because of what he's done, because he's already been in my place. Jesus in my place. Do you know what this means for your everyday? Do you know what this means? Sometimes in my corner of Christianity, it sort of became a popular phrase. People would say, oh, well, God just has me in a waiting season right now. Yes, God has you in a waiting season. And some people just kind of use that as an excuse because they don't want to serve in kids ministry. But anyway, that's a different sermon. Here's the thing. We'll say, God has me in a waiting season. And look, much of life is waiting, okay? Much of it is waiting. It's one reason Advent is an important season, because it's about waiting. That's a lot of life. But see, I had the impression for the longest that if I found myself waiting on something, that God had just pushed pause and gone off to do other things. That it's like I was waiting, so he's waiting too. No. He works while I wait. He's not doing nothing. Even if it seems like he's not doing anything. There's not a pause in his purpose for this world. There's not a pause in his purpose for your life. So that means that when I deal with disappointment or rejection or frustration, I can say, God, I don't know what you're doing right now, but I know what you've done. So even though I might not feel your presence here, I know your presence is here because you've been here. You've experienced this and you did it in my place and you reigned victorious over this. See, I can know that whatever I'm facing, whatever I'm dealing with, Jesus has already been there. He's in my situation. He's working on my behalf. I can trust that even when I don't see that, even when I don't feel that, because the Word became flesh. He shared in my humanity. This is Christmas. God has come down to you. That means wherever you find yourself today, whatever you're dealing with, however you're feeling about things right now, that's where He is, because that's where He came. God has a purpose for you. God has there's a personal, custom-made purpose for you. And maybe you know what that is, or you know part of what that is, and you're walking it, or maybe you don't. But even if you do, here's the thing. There's a purpose that's under all the rest. There's a purpose that's more foundational than all the rest. Everything else flows out of this one purpose that God has for us. This is what John is explaining to us here in John chapter 1. God desires for you to have an intimate fellowship with Him. An intimate fellowship with Him. God is not primarily looking for something from you. God desires something for you. And this text points to what it is. It says that He made His dwelling among us. That word translated dwelling by the NIV, it has a very specific referent in the Greek. It's the same word that the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, used for tabernacle. Tabernacle. And in John's day, all of his readers would have been familiar with that translation. They would have recognized this, that the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And to make for sure that you don't miss the connection, he says, we have seen His glory, because that's what you would see in the tabernacle. That's what was in the Holy of Holies. It was the whole point of the tabernacle. The tabernacle, later on the temple, it was the place where you go and meet God. I mean, yeah, God is omnipresent. God is at all places, at all times. God encountered people at all kinds of places and in different times in all kinds of ways, but the tabernacle was different. The temple was different. It was absolutely reliable. It was God's dwelling on earth. The tabernacle is God making Himself available to His people. God could show up any way He chooses, out in the fields or in your home, whatever. But here, you can know that He's going to be there. You don't know whether He's going to show up in your house or in your bedroom, but you can know that He's here. When Moses was on the mountain, he says, show me your glory. And God says, no, that would kill you. Moses is asking here, when he asks to see God's glory, he's asking for intimate knowledge. He's asking for personal connection. And God says, you can't handle that. But I'll pass by and you can see where I've been. And just that experience, limited though it is, it makes Moses' face shine with the glory of God so that he has to wear a veil. In the tabernacle, later on the temple, in front of the Holy of Holies, where the glory of God was, the Shekinah, there was a veil. Why? Why the veil? Because we can't handle it. It's too much. God's presence, God's glory is there. You can know it's there reliably so, but concealed. You can't see it. You can know it's there. You can't see it. But John says, no, in Him we see it. We see it. We've seen His glory. What Moses couldn't have, we have. What we couldn't handle in Him now becomes accessible, available. Christmas is really the end of religion. Christmas is the end of religion as we know it. A Jew or a pagan that was investigating Christianity, they'd have some basic questions like, where is your temple? Where's your temple? Because all of the ancient religions had temples. You can go over and see the ruins of those temples even today. But Christians had no temple. They have no temple. In fact, they didn't even really have holy sites. They didn't have places of pilgrimage for the first 3 centuries. We don't really know the site of Jesus' crucifixion. There's traditional sites that you can go see over there, but there's none of them that are more or less likely to be it. We don't know where it is because they didn't keep track of it. We don't know where the actual tomb of Jesus was. There's traditional sites. But see, nobody was interested in that for hundreds of years. Nobody was interested in any of that for the first 300 years. They had no temple. They had no holy sites. Why? Jesus is our temple. His presence is residing in us. We know where He is, so there's no need to go visit where He's been. Christians also had no priests. I mean, they had pastors, they had teachers and so forth, but they didn't function like priests. All the other religions had priests. The job of a priest was to be the go-between for you and God. They go to God for you, and God comes to you through them. And this meant that most popular religions had lots of priests, and they were very busy all the time. They had a lot to do. But Christians would say, Jesus is our priest. One priest, and he's seated at the right hand of God. Priests only sat down when they were done. In the Jewish temple, of all of the furniture that's laid out and detailed there in the book of Leviticus, one thing that there's not in the temple is there's no chair. Because you could only sit down after it was done, and it was never done. But Jesus is seated. It's already done in him. Christians would say, we have one who's gone to God on our behalf, and we have one in whom God has come to us once and for all. He's seated at the right hand of the Father. Every other religion had sacrifices of one kind or another. There were things that had to be done in order to get the favor of God, or at least keep that God from doing bad things to you. There was some action that you had to undertake, something you did, something you offered. And Christians would say, well, we don't really do any of all that. Our sacrifice is just a sacrifice of thanksgiving. It's, as Hebrews says it, the fruit of our lips that proclaim his name. In other words, our sacrifice isn't something we do, but rather it's proclaiming what he's done for us. Jesus is our sacrifice once and for all. This is the end of religion. It's why the earliest Christians back in the Roman Empire became known as atheists. Yeah, we were the original atheists. Because they looked at us and they said, that's nothing like any God that we've ever heard of. That's nothing like any religion that we've ever seen. And it put temples out of business. You can read in the book of Acts about a riot that happens in Ephesus because so many people came to faith in Christ that it threatened the economy. Yeah, religion was big business. This is the end of all that. Everything that the temple was and how it all worked and what happened there, it's all fulfilled in him. Christianity is something that's wholly different. We didn't get a new list of things to do. Instead, we get a living, breathing person who is our priest and our temple and our sacrifice. He fulfills all those things. What was concealed in the tabernacle and the temple is revealed in him. What had been going on in the temple behind veils and the access had been restricted to just a few, and what was surrounded by rituals and duty is now out in the open among us, John says. We've been enabled to see what Moses couldn't see. Why couldn't Moses see it? Because of the separation. We talked a little bit about this last week. My wife, she enjoys true crime podcasts and documentaries. So if she ever murders me, she will definitely get away with it because she's put in the work to study how to do it. But you know, most of the stories that she listens to, most of them have a clean ending. But we watched one a little while back that didn't. People had been really wronged, and the person behind it, the main culprit, was found not guilty. Amazingly enough, was found not guilty. And there's lots of outrage about it because something needs to happen. Something should be done about it. This person should really be in prison. But he's not. But one thing's for sure, he still can't have any kind of relationship with the people that he wronged. He can't come into relationship because what he did created a separation between him and his victims. See, this is what all of the Old Testament sacrifices, the priesthood, the temple, that's what it was all pointing to, was that we've wronged God. We've allied ourselves with the enemy of God. We've cooperated with our own oppressor. There's a separation, and something has to be done about it. It can't just go on like this. The price of separation from God is death. That's what God was telling Moses when he said, you can't see me. You can't just come up to my face. You can't see me. It's mercy. God's saying, no, you can't see me because I don't want you to die. You remember what happened at Sinai? And God comes down on the mountain and there's fire and there's smoke and there's an earthquake and there's a trumpet blast and it keeps getting louder and louder. And they're told, hey, you can't even touch the mountain. Don't even come close to the mountain because the separation is more than you think. And if we try and approach God on our own, we fall into that chasm. It's death for us. Something has to fill that space between us. Something has to bridge the chasm. There has to be a veil. There has to be a tabernacle. There has to be a priest. There has to be a sacrifice. But see, what we see here is different. At Bethlehem, God comes down not with fire, not with smoke, not with the trumpet blast, not with the earthquake, but as a baby. As a baby. You know what that means? See, before at Sinai, faced with God, we're vulnerable. We're endangered because of our separation. But here, this is God being vulnerable. This is God putting himself in danger because he himself is stepping into our separation to overcome it. He fills the space between us and does it as us in the flesh, sharing our humanity. See, you and I couldn't enter into the presence of God. We couldn't have that intimate fellowship with God. So he entered into our history and our situation and our humanity and ultimately our death so that the presence of God, the glory of God that was inaccessible before, now comes to you and invites you close. This is what John is laying out right here at the start of his gospel, and this is what Christmas is all about. God has come to you. You don't have to do anything to get to him. He's come to you. The one that we encounter in the manger at Bethlehem is none other than God himself here in the flesh. That's the claim of John's gospel. Now, if that's really true, it means you can't be a part-time Christian. It means you can't be a part-time Christian. If this is true, then it can't be something that's on the periphery of your life. Jesus can't be something that's on the outskirts of your life. He can't just be your ticket to heaven when you die, and in the meantime, you live for all sorts of other things. That you find meaning in all kinds of other places and go out looking for some other logos. No, this text says the Word was God from the beginning. The one in the manger is the only true and living God. Jesus doesn't come as a messenger with new information. Jesus is not the founder of a new religion. In other words, you can't just like what he stands for or try to follow his teachings. Jesus is nothing less than God himself. That's what we're faced with. Here is God come to you. That means he's everything. He's the center of it all, or he's nothing at all. He's the judge. He's the judge, and the judgment arrived in person. Later on, he tells Martha in John's gospel, I am the resurrection and life. I am the resurrection. The resurrection was an event. It was an event for the last day, for the end of all time. That was what every Jew believed in that day, was that resurrection was something that was for the end of time. And Jesus says, no, it's not an event at the end of time. It's me. He's the last day arrived in person. Before he goes to the cross, Jesus says, now is the judgment of this world. In other words, he's the final judgment, and the judge arrived in person. You get this? To put it really plainly, the only question on which your life and my life will be judged is not about what you did or what you didn't do or anything that we achieved or accomplished. No, it's just this: how are you with Jesus? It's the only question that matters. What place does he have in your life? What place does he have in your family, in your decisions, in your schedule, in your finances, in your work? It's not just, do you trust him to get you into heaven when you die? No, do you trust him in all the places between here and there? Because that's exactly where he's shown up in the flesh, sharing our humanity in order to invite you into an intimate fellowship with him that includes your everyday. All of the rough and tumble and the ho-hum and the mundacity of life, that's where he wants to be. And this is why he comes to us as a baby. Because it's how God approaches us. Not as an irresistible or dominating power. As a baby. As a baby. You know, something about babies that I've noticed is that a baby can't force you to do anything. A baby can't make you do anything. They can't force you to pick them up. They sure can be persistent, though. And God is like that. He desires to be with us. And he wants you to be with him and to let him into your life, into your whole life. And for most of us here today, look, we've invited him in, but truth be known, we still have places in our hearts and lives that we haven't let him be with us. Places where we struggle to let him in, where we struggle to give that area or that thing over to his lordship. And he won't make us. He won't force his way on us. No, he wants an intimate fellowship. Jesus later in John's gospel, he says to his disciples, he says, I don't call you servants, I call you friends. That's what he wants for you. Friendship, fellowship. God's not looking to just get something out of you or from you as though he needs anything from us anyways. Or there's anything that we have that didn't originate with him. No, he wants something for you. Catherine was saying it earlier during the offering. It's this season, it's all about a gift. And how do we respond to that gift? Well, first of all, receive it. Don't leave it wrapped up under the tree. Psalm 116 says David writes, what shall I return to the Lord for all his goodness for me? And then in the very next verse he says, I will take the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. David says, how can I repay the Lord for what he's done for me? Really, you know what? I can't. But I can take what he offers. I can take what he's given. Now, the second thing is, though, let it change you. See, some gifts are really nice and some gifts are really memorable, really thoughtful, but once in a while there's a gift that changes you. Now, how do I know if I've really received it? How do I know if I really have it? How do I know if I really have that in my life, in my heart? Is it just that I answered an altar call? Is it just that I've prayed a prayer? Is it that I was baptized? Is it that I've assented to a set of doctrinal propositions? No. Here's how you know. Here's how you know. It changes you. It changes you. You can't be the same. This gift, it transforms you from the inside out. Changes you. I have a friend back in Houston, a wonderful member of the church that we serve there, Miss Jean Clark. And Miss Jean had a number of health challenges over the years, and but a few years ago, she had a heart transplant. She had a heart transplant, and she would have died without it. It was a miracle that she got it. She's alive today because somebody gave their heart. See, if you got that kind of gift, could your life ever be the same? Would a simple thank you be sufficient? How do you ever get over something like that? It has to be different. Things have to change after that. Christmas is about God becoming human, the Word made flesh, made vulnerable, made killable, sharing our humanity, entering into your place, into your death, so that you could have an intimate fellowship and friendship with God. It's a gift. And if you've received that, how could you stay the same? How could thank you be enough? How could you just go on living the same way that you've always lived? But the truth is, many people do get over it. Many people do get over it. This story is old hat to them. They've heard it all before. They've gotten over the wonder and the awe of it. And some of us in here, we've allowed our hearts to be captured by other things, by situations and by people and by other things that we have going on. And we've confined Jesus to Sunday morning or a daily devotional, and we've sought meaning in other things, and we've looked for purpose and significance in all kinds of other lesser things. And we built lives on things that are too shallow and that pass away with time. And for some of us, this is the reason that your life is shaking down right now, because it's not built on something that's solid enough or that's deep enough. We've been looking for some other logos. We've been looking for some other logic, some other meaning to it all. And we keep missing the logos that has come to you, the meaning that comes to you, the eternal Word made flesh, Jesus, in your place.